Over the past few months, I have been sent literally hundreds of recordings from my subscribers of their piano playing, and previously in 4 other videos they've shown to be quite good. So in today's video, I'm going to react to more of my subscribers' piano playing. So let's get into it. Okay, first up we have Leon, and Leon has been playing for 8 months and is self-taught, and in order to record this video, he strapped a phone to his chest. I appreciate the commitment. Nice, so there's some really interesting chords in there. It starts on like an F major 7 chord, and then like an E minor 7, then D minor 7, and then C major 7. I'm assuming this is an original piece. I'm sure I'll be corrected in the comments if it's not. The first thing I would say though is in the 3rd chord, the D minor 7, where he had a G on top. Very interesting note to add. But I would probably use fingers that allow you to not cross over so much, because it's quite a jump to cross over and come back down again, and you end up doing some weird kind of arm swinging when you can just use 5, 3, 2, 1 and move your wrist all the way around. I mean, the chords almost remind me of the song Golden Hour by Jake. But if it is an original composition, then the chord choices are really nice. The other thing that I would say is to try and make sure that the pulse of the music stays the same. As a listener, in this case, you're kind of expecting 6 beats to the bar, because you're hearing in the left hand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So sometimes if there's a gap after the group of 6, it feels like there's 7 in a bar. And sometimes that can be caused by trying to slow down the speed, but it happening too suddenly. For example, if I play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At the end of that first group of 6, I've slowed it down, but it almost happened too fast towards the end of the group of 6, which means as a listener, it's hard to tell whether you've slowed down or whether there's just a sudden stop in the music and there's an extra beat there. So if you do want to kind of slow down and push and pull the music, then try and do it more slowly and subtly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that you're kind of leading the listener through that journey with you, rather than the listener slightly losing that sense of pulse. I think something else that can really help that is emphasizing the 1st and 4th beat of each bar, because when there's 6 beats in a bar like this, you're using a time signature of 6/8, and usually in a time signature of 6/8, you emphasize groups of 3. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you slightly emphasize those notes when you're playing the piece of music, then you feel a sense of security in what you're listening to. It's super good though. Those arpeggios were very clean. And as I said, the chord choices were really nice. Next up, we have Jason. Now, Jason has actually had a fair few lessons with me, so I actually know his playing pretty well, but I think he sent me this video before then. So Jason started very young and he was never consistent with practice. He's only really been consistent within the last year, and he enjoys playing covers that he's passionate about. So go and subscribe to his channel because he does do some very good piano covers on there. Nice, so this is Chopin's Waltz in A minor, and he plays it very well. It's very hard to get that right hand to sing out when you've got those left hand chords going on. It's really tempting to go. But in this, Jason has a really nice balance between the two hands, so the left hand is kind of out the way, and a listener can focus on the melody. The interesting thing about this piece is that it's a waltz, and a waltz is a dance, so it needs to have that kind of cha that a waltz has. And the reason for that is because if someone was dancing to it, you want it to be really easy for them to feel the downbeat and then the two upbeats afterwards. And this is another reason why, although it's good to flex the time a little bit and use some rubato, so the stretching of time in this piece of music, you want to be really sparing and careful with it, because if you do it too much, you can lose the sense of downbeat on those bass notes. And you can almost imagine that if someone was trying to dance to it, it'd be very difficult to work out when they're going to put their feet down on the particular beats. So you want it to feel like there is a bit of lightness and a bit of playfulness with the time, but not so much that it's difficult to predict where beat 1 is going to be. The other thing that's interesting about this piece is that the chords are actually really quite clear as to what they are and where they are. So this piece is in A minor, as it says in the title, but it's interesting to work out what the chords are in each of the bars and how they relate to an A minor scale. So for example, in the first bar, the chord that's been outlined is an A minor chord, which is chord 1 in the scale, and that will feel like home. But interestingly, in both bar 3 and in bar 7, we get a G chord with a 7 on top of it, so G, B, D, and F, and this makes something called a dominant 7. In music, the word dominant just means note 5 or chord 5 in a scale. So if we're in a C major scale, note 5 is G, and chord 5 is a G chord. So that's the dominant chord. And a dominant 7th chord is that same chord, but if we add the 7th on top. So we get notes 1, 3, 5, and 7. And the function of a dominant 7th chord is to confirm a key, and therefore it's used in music quite a lot to change the key. So you get this kind of tense chord that then resolves to C major, and this happens in both bar 3 and in bar 7. So when you hear that chord, you can lean on it a bit more to then relax on bar 4 and bar 8, when the tension of that chord finally gets released and goes to C major. So what I would say for Jason in particular, because I know that he already knows a fair bit about music, especially with this piece because the chords are quite clear in each bar, is to work out what the chords are and what their function is, how they relate to the scale that's being used, if the chord is major or minor, and how that impacts how the music feels. Because then with all of that information, you can make a lot of decisions about how you want to play it. But he does play it very nicely, and he's very naturally musical with how to shape the melody. Okay, next up we have Zoni. Now Zoni is 14 years old and has been playing for 8 years. For the past 4 years, he's been playing pretty seriously, and this is a performance of Beethoven's Appassionata 3rd movement, which was from his school talent show. Very well played, and the entirety of the Appassionata is not easy at all, and this movement in particular is very hard. There's a lot of difficult scales to do in that right hand. And I know how difficult it is to play pieces that are this difficult on electric pianos opposed to on an acoustic piano. And that's for a few different reasons. Firstly, the keys don't feel quite the same, and when you're playing pieces of this level, it's really important that you get enough resistance from the key in order to be able to get all those keys to sing out. But also, you've got the obvious issue of the piano slightly moving, and you're trying to be very accurate with runs, where it requires your fingers to be in the right place at the right time. So this is no mean feat at all, and especially at 14 years old, it's crazy. So firstly, in the opening couple of bars where you've got that chord that repeats, I would say I think it probably needs to sound a little bit more impactful and furious. And also because the scale that happens after those chords is quiet and it's like a solo running line in your right hand, you want there to be a really big contrast between those two things. Some big fiery chords and then kind of a quiet running scale at the top of your right hand. And then that scale can build momentum again as it goes down to that low section. I also think in a performance situation with this kind of piece, it's easy to let the pressure come to you. And when your heart rate increases in a performance, your speed and tempo tends to get quicker than you want it to. Which means those scales in this situation can start running away with you and they can start to sound a little bit pushed. Which means you have slightly less control over what your hands are doing, and that's kind of the biggest component as to playing these type of pieces, is you want to try and retain control throughout. It also sounds like there might be a little bit of tension in the hands as the piece goes on, particularly as you start to get these kind of awkward shapes on the piano, which don't feel natural in the hand. So the way I would suggest practicing this piece to try and get rid of that is to practice it in really, really small sections, so like a bar or 2 bars at a time, and at the end of that bar, actively release your wrist, so that you're training in moments when that wrist will unlock and your fingers won't feel so tense. And this piece is supposed to be sort of big and passionate, and it's got quieter moments in it when you've got scales and things. But I think the bigger moments and the swells within the music can be really pushed. And there are so many moments in this piece where you've got sforzandos written on chords. So on those particular chords, you do want to really dig into them a little bit more. But generally, if you have a forte section, I think you can afford to make it have a little bit more of a bigger presence. I would also be really careful with the pedaling around some of these scales because you don't want them to all merge into one. And this is precisely what makes this piece so hard. It's because not only have you got a load of fast notes that you've got to play, which is what people assume will be the most difficult thing, but you've also got big dynamics and big dynamic changes. You've also got a load of pedaling to worry about. You've got to push and pull the music a little bit so that the phrases sound like they make sense. There's just a lot going on, so Zoni has done a very, very good job. Okay, next up we have Alex. So Alex has been playing since he was 9 years old and he's now 30. He's gone through a lot of spurts of playing and then not played for big chunks of time, and he's never taken lessons and he can't read music. And this piece is a piece that he wrote when he was going through a difficult time, and it took him about 20 minutes to write in the heat of the moment. Nice! It's a really nice piece of music. So it seems to be based around 3 chords, which are E minor, D major, and C major. Then it goes back up again. And I really like it. It's very ambient, and you can tell that it's a piece written with a particular feeling in mind. And from what I can tell, there seems to be 2 component parts to the melody. So the first part is... and then the second part was something like this. both of which are very nice, but what I would suggest is trying to make that stand out a little bit more from the chords, because although the chords are the thing that requires the most focus, because it's the thing that's moving quite a lot in the left hand, the melody is the thing that a listener needs to latch onto. And you can do that in very simple ways, for example playing octaves in the right hand, and maybe throwing in another one of the chord notes in the middle, just to add some extra interest. That's just an idea that can maybe make that melody stand out a little bit more. Also, when the kind of main melody comes in rather than that motif, personally I would pull away a little bit, and rather than thickening up the texture of those chords for that moment, I would take some of the chord notes away so that later on in the piece of music you've got more movement to be able to make it big and more impactful. So doing something maybe like this. And then from there, you've got loads of room to grow it throughout the piece of music. Another thing that I would suggest is in the left hand, once you've established the chords that you're using, so in this case, E minor, D major, C major, D major, E minor, it might be interesting to change some of those bass notes and change them so that you're still using the same chords, but you're using a different note from the chord, because it can really change the character of the melody and the chords themselves. So for example, you might play the melody once with the chords as you wrote them. And then you might change the bass note, so the lowest note that's in the chord, for each of those chords. Something like that. It's just another way that you can keep those chords sounding interesting. Ultimately, with your own pieces of music, you can write it exactly how you want to write it, so any suggestions that I make are purely down to preference. But I would say you want to create a narrative, so you want some lighter moments, and you want some darker moments, and you want some bigger moments, and some smaller moments in the piece of music. And then you've just got to consider how you want to do that. But it sounds great. Next up we have Harry, and Harry has been playing for 1 year and 2 months, and is only self-taught. And he's spent an hour and a half each day practicing scales, arpeggios, sight reading, and pieces from a method book, which is essentially the perfect practice session. Very good, and once again, great playing. There's a couple of interesting things about this particular version of the piece of music. Firstly, in the left hand, each of these chords is outlined quite clearly, because you get just straight arpeggios of standard chords. So what I would say is similar to what I said about the Chopin piece in A minor, because these chords are quite clear, try and think about what that means and how the chords affect the piece of music. For example, the first chord is C major, and that feels like home. But then we get an E major chord, which is kind of unexpected because you've got a G sharp in the middle of it, and there isn't a G sharp in a C major scale. So it feels like it's kind of lifting up. Then we get an A major chord, and then a D major chord, but then that D major chord turns to D minor. So it kind of darkens. Then we get G major, which returns back home to C major. So there's some really interesting chords in there that tell us more about how we might want to play the piece of music. Also, in the melody, there are a couple of interesting things. So the first 3 notes of this melody are just a repeated E. And when you get repeated notes, especially in a piece like this, you probably don't want to play that same note the same all 3 times that you're playing it, because that would sound very boring. So when you get repeated notes, you would usually do one of 2 things. You would either push through those 3 notes to make it sound like it's climaxing on the last note, or you would pull away through those 3 notes so it sounds like it's an echo. So pushing through those 3 notes would sound like this. And pulling away would sound like this. Now, because that second chord in the left hand sounds like it's lifting up because it's got that G sharp, an unusual note in it, you probably want to follow that in the melody and push through the music so that you land on that chord. And then when you get to that D major chord that goes to D minor, you really want to feel that sinking feeling of it going from a major chord to a minor chord. And then at the end, you can make it feel like it's returning back home to that C major chord. So all those small elements can inform you about how you can interpret the music, and this is what it would sound like with all of those things together. So I think when you first start learning the piano, it's really easy to think about the technique, trying to get the notes in the right place, worrying about whether your hands are actually doing what you want them to do. But when you get past that, you really need to start thinking about why you're playing the notes in a certain way and what you actually want the sounds to sound like. And more importantly, why do you want it to sound like that? What in the music tells you that you want it to sound like that? But once again, Harry is a really great player, and you could tell he's taking real care about which fingers he's playing and how he's playing the piece of music. Okay, next up we have Sarah. Now, Sarah has been playing since 2022 and feels like the piano has helped her develop as a person, and it's given her skills like patience and passion. Nice, very good. That's quite technically demanding, and you've got a lot of coordination to worry about, so that is really good playing. The first thing that I immediately noticed was that Sarah's wrists are kind of down here rather than lifted up here. And this can be for a number of reasons. If the piano is too high up, then often you end up kind of playing like this. Or if your elbows are too stiff and end up really tight to your body, then you can play like that as well. But I actually suspect for Sarah, even if the piano was lower, her tendency would be to play with her wrists like this, because when she played chords, her wrists tend to fall through the chords. So you just want to make sure that your wrist is constantly supporting whatever you're playing. And the best way to practice that is by playing scales and arpeggios, because your wrist has to move all the time and it will get used to supporting your fingers. And I think it's worth saying why it's important that your wrists are lifted up. And this is because there is actually 3 pivot points when you play the piano. There's your finger, there's your wrist, and there's your arm. And if you play with your wrists too low, not only is it hard to move your wrists around to support your fingers, but your fingers themselves can't move very easily if you're playing something particularly fast. And as pieces get more and more challenging and more demanding as you get better at the piano, you're more reliant on the fact that your hands are going to stay nice and relaxed and supported so that they can do what they need to do. Essentially, you want to give your arms, wrists, and fingers as much space as you possibly can in order to play wherever you need to play, at whatever speeds you need to play at. Also, I can't attest to this because I have never had long nails, but long nails also mean that you can't really play on the tip of your finger very well, which probably also means you end up moving your wrist back in order to play your finger flat. But actually, Sarah played that technically very, very well, and it sounded great. Okay, next up we have Dylan. Now, Dylan always had a cheap keyboard at home that he occasionally messed around with, but now he's got a better digital piano, although he doesn't read sheet music and he doesn't understand music theory. So everything that he has learned is from the dreaded Synthesia videos. Wow, really nice, and I do really like this song. So this song is actually based around 3 chords, which are D flat major, A flat major, and then G flat major. But then later in the piece, it moves to B flat minor, A flat major, and G flat major. So this song actually only uses just a couple of chords. And I do think it would be useful for Dylan to understand those chords that he's playing. And the reason for that is because at the moment in the right hand, he's just playing the melody, but he could add some of those notes from the chord in to the right hand to make it sound a little bit more interesting, especially in the pre-chorus and the chorus when the music starts building a little bit. It might be interesting to add a few more notes into the chords. So instead of something like you might get something like this. It means you can start playing around with the idea of the song and making it your own, rather than having to directly copy someone else's version of it that you might want to tweak. I do, however, think that Dylan has quite good technique. I mean, his hands look really relaxed, and especially in his right hand where he's playing the melody, his fingers are really curved on the keys, which is really nice to see. But I do think Dylan could be an even better pianist if he just learned to read a little bit of music, and more importantly, to me, would be to understand what he's actually playing. Because if you can play this well playing someone else's version of a song, imagine what you can do if you can embellish it and make it sound completely unique. As ever, all of the players in this video are very, very good players. And if you want to add your video onto the list of hundreds that I already have, then you can send me your video using the link in the description. And if you want to see my reaction to more of my subscribers' piano playing, then head on through and I will see you there.